Mount St. Helens' eruption in 1980 was one of the most powerful and terrifying natural disasters in recent history. This video breaks down 10 shocking facts about that day, from the mountain literally sliding away to the sideways blast that reshaped everything in its path. Get ready to uncover the raw, unstoppable force of nature that changed the landscape forever. Mount St. Helens didn't just erupt, it collapsed first. That's what set off one of the most terrifying chain reactions in geological history. It all started on the morning of May 18, 1980, when a powerful magnitude 5.1 earthquake struck beneath the mountain. What happened next wasn't a typical rock slide or minor collapse. It was the entire north face of Mount St. Helens already bulging from weeks of magma pressure, giving way in one sudden catastrophic movement. Fact 1. The eruption triggered the largest landslide ever recorded in human history. Between 0.67 and 1 full cubic mile of rock, ice, and earth broke free and thundered downhill at speeds topping 100 miles per hour. Some estimates say even faster. That's roughly 12% of the mountain's entire mass just vanishing in seconds. Whole valleys were buried under hundreds of feet of debris. Hills became plains. The once iconic snow-capped cone of Mount St. Helens was instantly replaced with a gaping crater. The sheer scale of the collapse is still hard to process. Imagine an entire section of a city, roads, ground, buildings, turning into a raging, unstoppable wave of earth. That was the reality. The mountain didn't just erupt, it disintegrated, leaving behind a scar that told the world even the strongest looking landscapes can fall apart in an instant. Most people picture volcanoes erupting straight up with plumes of ash and fire shooting skyward. But Mount St. Helens didn't follow the rules that day. After the massive landslide uncorked the mountain's pressure, the eruption didn't go vertical, it went sideways. Fact 2. The eruption produced a lateral blast so fast and violent, it leveled everything across hundreds of square miles. The collapse of the mountain's north face released a superheated mix of gas, ash, and pulverized rock that exploded outward at near supersonic speed, over 300 miles per hour, maybe even faster in the first few seconds. It was like uncapping a shaken soda bottle, but on a scale no one had ever seen. This wasn't just a strong wind, it was a wall of death. Entire forests were snapped flat like matchsticks. Trees hundreds of years old were stripped of bark, blown over in perfect rows, or completely vaporized in the hottest zones. The blast zone stretched across about 230 square miles, an area roughly the size of Chicago, and within that zone, life didn't just stop, it vanished. Anything alive, whether it was a tree, an animal, or a person, had almost no chance. The blast carved a clear, fan-shaped pattern into the landscape, a permanent mark showing exactly where the mountain aimed its fury. It wasn't just an eruption, it was a precision strike of destruction, fired directly from the heart of a collapsing volcano. By the time the ash settled and the smoke cleared, Mount St. Helens didn't just look different, it was missing a massive part of itself. The eruption didn't just damage the mountain, it completely reshaped it. Fact 3. The eruption blew off over 1,300 feet from the summit, leaving behind a massive crater. Before May 18th, Mount St. Helens stood proudly at 9,677 feet tall, with a smooth, symmetrical peak. But when the north face collapsed and the lateral blast followed, the top of the mountain was literally blown away. It happened in just minutes. What had taken thousands of years to form was destroyed in an instant. The result? A deep, gaping horseshoe-shaped crater, about 1.2 to 1.8 miles wide and more than 2,000 feet deep. Imagine carving out a hole in a mountain big enough to bury all of Manhattan under more than 40 feet of debris. That's the scale we're talking about. What used to be a towering peak turned into a hollowed-out shell, stripped bare by the force of nature. The mountain wasn't just changed, it was decapitated. This transformation, both violent and permanent, became one of the most haunting symbols of the eruption's raw power. To really understand the terror of Mount St. Helens, you have to look at the raw force behind it. This wasn't just a loud explosion or a big cloud of smoke. The energy released was beyond anything most of us can even picture. Fact 4. The eruption unleashed the explosive force of over 1,500 atomic bombs. More specifically, it's estimated that the eruption released thermal energy equal to about 24 to 26 megatons of TNT. To put that in perspective, the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima in World War II was around 15 kilotons. That means the Mount St. Helens eruption was at least 1,500 times more powerful than that bomb. That energy didn't just cause the mountain to explode, it fueled everything else. The landslide, the sideways blast, the pyroclastic flows, and the ash cloud that stretched into the sky. It superheated gases to temperatures of around 660 degrees Fahrenheit, instantly incinerating anything in the blast zone. Trees didn't just burn, they were turned to ash. Animals and people caught in it didn't stand a chance. This wasn't a slow release of energy. It all happened in a terrifying burst that lasted only moments, but caused destruction for miles in every direction. When you hear the numbers, it almost doesn't sound real, but it was. And it's a chilling reminder that when Earth decides to release its power, it does so with no hesitation and no mercy. The blast zone around Mount St. Helens was a scene of total destruction, but the volcano's fury didn't stop at the mountain's edge. It climbed high into the sky and reached far across the country. Fact 5. The eruption sent an ash cloud over 16 miles high and darkened skies more than 250 miles away. In just 15 minutes, a towering column of ash and gas shot straight into the atmosphere, reaching over 80,000 feet. That's higher than commercial airplanes fly. This monstrous plume turned the sky black, even in places that seemed far from danger. In Spokane, Washington, more than 250 miles away, it looked like night had fallen by mid-morning. Streetlights flickered on, cars pulled off the roads, and people stood stunned in a dark, silent world, watching the gray ash fall like snow. But the ash didn't stop with Washington. Within 3 days, the finest particles had spread across the entire United States. Within 2 weeks, those particles had circled the globe. The air itself carried a signature of the disaster. An estimated 520 to 540 million tons of ash were ejected, settling over more than 22,000 square miles. And this wasn't soft powder. It was pulverized rock, gritty and sharp. It clogged engines, choked rivers, buried crops, and blanketed towns in a suffocating layer of gray. The eruption's reach didn't just destroy landscapes, it disrupted lives thousands of miles away. It was a terrifying reminder that when a volcano of that size erupts, its impact can literally cover the world. The Mount St. Helens eruption wasn't just a geological disaster, it was an ecological one too. In the blink of an eye, entire ecosystems were erased. Fact 6. The eruption obliterated over 4 billion board feet of timber and killed an estimated 7,000 large animals. The lateral blast and following pyroclastic flows didn't just scorch the land, they flattened it. Forests that had stood for hundreds of years were knocked over like dominoes, stripped bare of branches and bark. The trees that weren't blown away were burned, buried, or vaporized completely. From the air, it looked like someone had taken a giant hand and swept it across the landscape, leaving nothing standing. The destruction didn't stop with the trees. Wildlife was hit just as hard. Thousands of deer, elk, and bears were caught in the blast zone, along with uncountable birds and small mammals. Even aquatic life suffered. Rivers and lakes filled with hot ash and debris, killing off millions of fish, including countless young salmon in hatcheries. The once green Pacific Northwest became a lifeless, gray wasteland almost instantly. Rescue pilots described it as a moonscape, silent, scorched, and sterile. Nothing moved, no birds sang. The vibrant wilderness that once surrounded Mount St. Helens was gone in a flash, replaced by a haunting stillness. It was one of the most complete and rapid destructions of a natural habitat ever witnessed in modern times. What followed the blast wasn't just ash and fire. It was a flood of mud, rock, and destruction that roared down the mountainside like a living force. Fact 7. The eruption unleashed lahars, volcanic mudflows that destroyed bridges, roads, and everything in their path. The intense heat from the eruption instantly melted the glaciers and thick snowpack sitting atop Mount St. Helens. All that water, an estimated 46 billion gallons, mixed with volcanic debris to form lahars. These weren't ordinary mudslides. They were thick, cement-like rivers of ash, pumice, and rock, surging down river valleys with terrifying power. High up on the slopes, some of these lahars tore down the mountain at speeds close to 90 miles per hour. Even when they slowed to just a few miles per hour in flatter terrain, they were still strong enough to crush everything in their way. They snapped trees, buried homes, and tossed around vehicles and logging equipment like toys. The Tuttle River Valley was hit especially hard. Entire bridges, 27 of them, were destroyed or left in ruins. Logging camps and towns miles downstream were suddenly swallowed by this fast-moving sludge. For many people in these areas, there was no warning. The lahars came silently but forcefully, turning familiar rivers into deadly brown torrents. Even after the eruption ended, so the lahars kept reshaping the landscape. They clogged riverbeds with thick sediment, which led to years of recurring floods. In some places, the courses of rivers were permanently changed. The lahars of Mount St. Helens weren't just a secondary threat. They were a devastating disaster of their own, spreading destruction far from the mountain itself. Mount St. Helens' eruption didn't just tear through the landscape, it struck a massive blow to the local economy and infrastructure, leaving a financial disaster in its wake. Fact 8. The eruption caused over $1 billion in damages in 1980, which would be more than $3.4 billion today. The immediate aftermath saw 200 homes either buried under ash or swept away by mud flows. Vital infrastructure took a huge hit. 47 bridges were destroyed or badly damaged, 15 miles of railway tracks were wiped out, and 185 miles of highways and roads were either buried or washed away. The timber industry, a cornerstone of the local economy, suffered staggering losses. Over 4 billion board feet of timber were lost, enough wood to build about 300,000 two-bedroom homes. Farmland was coated in layers of ash, ruining crops and livelihoods. Tourism, once thriving due to the mountain's natural beauty, came to a standstill overnight. The cleanup was a massive effort. Approximately 900,000 tons of ash had to be removed just from Washington state highways and airports alone. This staggering price tag was more than just numbers. It was a harsh reminder of how deeply a single natural disaster can ripple through communities, economies, and daily life, leaving years of recovery ahead. Behind all the destruction and numbers lies the most heartbreaking truth: the human toll of Mount St. Helens' eruption. Fact 9. 57 people lost their lives during the May 18, 1980 eruption. These were not just statistics, they were real individuals. Scientists, photographers, loggers, residents, and tourists caught in the path of unimaginable destruction. Many, like volcanologist David Johnston, were stationed at observation posts, risking everything to study the volcano. His last chilling words over the radio, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it," capture the sudden horror of that moment. Some victims were residents who chose not to evacuate or visitors unaware of the eruption's scale. The official danger zones didn't anticipate the massive sideways blast that devastated areas thought to be safe. People miles away from the summit were caught by the searing heat and force of the lateral blast. Others were overtaken by fast-moving lahars or died from inhaling thick ash. Search and rescue teams faced grim scenes. Entire areas showed no sign of life, and some bodies were never recovered, buried beneath the altered landscape. This tragic loss of life stands as the most profound and terrifying reminder of the eruption's deadly power. The eruption's terror didn't end when the ash finally settled. In fact, the aftermath created a long-lasting nightmare that affected people and machinery across the Pacific Northwest and even beyond. Fact 10. The fine volcanic ash from Mount St. Helens caused widespread mechanical failures and serious environmental problems that lasted for months and years. This wasn't ordinary dust. It was made of tiny, sharp particles of rock and glass that were extremely harmful to breathe. Communities faced major health risks as the ash filled the air, but the damage went further than just health. Car engines seized up as their air filters clogged, and those tiny abrasive particles scratched engine cylinders. Electrical equipment short-circuited, while sewage and water treatment systems struggled to function under the weight of the ash. Air travel was disrupted for weeks because volcanic ash is a major hazard for jet engines. Cleanup was a massive and exhausting effort. Even after the initial layers of ash were cleared, winds would lift the fine dust again, causing ongoing problems and a constant gritty reminder of the eruption. Roads were slippery and dangerous, visibility was often poor, and the landscape remained a strange, eerie gray for a long time. This lingering mechanical and environmental fallout shows just how far the eruption's impact reached, disrupting daily life and infrastructure in deeply unsettling and lasting ways. Mount St. Helens' eruption wasn't just a moment of destruction. It reshaped how we understand volcanoes and the risks they pose. The eruption was a brutal reminder that nature's power can strike suddenly and with devastating force, catching many off guard despite warnings. The massive crater, the flattened forests, the rivers forever changed by lahars, and the blanket of ash across states stand as permanent markers of that terrifying day in May of 1980. Scientists learned invaluable lessons about volcanic activity, especially how magma movement can create bulges that signal impending eruptions, and how eruptions can blast sideways, not just straight up. These insights have since improved monitoring and safety measures around volcanoes worldwide. The human loss and ecological devastation were heartbreaking, but the recovery and regrowth in the decades since show nature's resilience. The landscape is slowly healing, with new forests growing and wildlife returning, yet the scars remain a sober reminder of Earth's incredible forces. In the end, Mount St. Helens taught us humility and vigilance. It reminded us that even the most familiar landscapes can transform in an instant, and that understanding these terrifying forces is key to protecting ourselves in the future. If the power of Mount St. Helens' eruption unsettled you, you're not alone. Its story is one of raw destruction, loss, and eventual renewal, a powerful chapter in the ever-unfolding story of our planet. Thanks for joining this journey into one of nature's most awe-inspiring and terrifying events. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts on which fact shocked you the most. Stay curious and stay safe out there.